Welcome to Spiritual Foundations for Life. You know, even in the wilderness, God led his people and he provided for their needs. He guided them with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night, according to Exodus chapter 13, verses 20 to 22, and he never deserted them. His guidance was unfailing and constant and loving. Psalm 78, verse 52 says, He brought his people out like a flock. He led them like a sheep through the wilderness. Psalm 100, verse 3 says, We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. John chapter 10, verse 14 says that Jesus is the good shepherd. And John chapter 10, verse 3 says, He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. In the Bible, God's children are often referred to as sheep. For the most part, that is a comforting idea, but it also conveys our helplessness. See, sheep are not carnivorous or flesh eaters like wolves are. Instead, they sacrificially give their wool while they're living, and they are meat when they die. There's a lot of good to be said for sheep, but they're not the smartest animal on the farm. See, when sheep are left alone in green pastures, they will actually eat themselves to death. Perhaps this is why David tells us in Psalm chapter 23, verses 1 and 2, The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing, but he makes me lie down in green pastures. You know, in our Western world, we keep our sheep moving in green pastures by chasing them from the rear. But that's not the way that shepherds lead their sheep in the Middle East. See, even to this day, the shepherd will let the sheep graze until they're full or in need of other greener pastures, and then the shepherd will stand up and say something to the sheep and then just start to walk. The sheep will look up and just instinctively follow the shepherd. And that is why Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 27, My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. The Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 8, verse 14, Those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. See, being led by the Spirit implies that we're not being pushed. So if someone asks us to make a hasty decision without a time for prayerful reflection, the answer should be no. God doesn't lead that way. God's guidance may come suddenly, but never to the spiritually unprepared. Pentecost was sudden, but it was preceded by many days of prayer, according to Acts chapter 1, verse 14. Being led by the Spirit also means that we're not being lured away into some secret or in some secret or deceptive manner. See, God does everything in the light. It is Satan that is the prince of darkness. In the book of Ephesians, Paul tells us that we're seated with Christ in the heavenlies, in the spiritual realm. But then he also encouraged us in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, to stand firm against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. To guard against deception, we must put on the armor of God, and we start with the belt of truth. The only way to recognize the counterfeit is to know the truth. The Apostle Paul wrote in 1 John chapter 5, verses 19 and 20, We know that we are children of God, and that the whole world is under the control of the evil one. We know also that the Son of God has come and has given us understanding so that we may know him who is true. Jesus said in John chapter 10, verses 14 and 15, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, and I lay down my life for the sheep. So as we come to know God's word, we also come to know God's Son, and he will lead us into the truth. Our key point is that the sheep of God's pasture know the voice of the good shepherd and they follow him. And Romans chapter 8, verse 14 says, Those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. God bless you. See you tomorrow for another episode of Spiritual Foundations for Life.